Hello, everyone. It's Debbie from healingfrombpd.org with my monthly video. And today's topic is your BPD setback is not a failure. It is information to empower you. BPD standing, of course, for borderline personality disorder. But if you have any other type of emotion regulation issue and you tend to view a setback or a mistake or a dip back into old undesired behavior as a failure, then this will also hopefully be helpful to you as well. So many of my students experience issues from time to time, as do I, as do you, as do all human beings who don't even have a mental health diagnosis or issues of that nature, in terms of a setback in regard to some type of behavior we are trying to reduce or no longer do. And in the case of BPD, borderline personality disorder, emotion regulation disorder, that sort of thing, it may look like, there's a certain behavior that you're wanting to reduce or no longer do. It could be any type of self-sabotaging behavior, anything along those lines. And maybe you had a day where you really just weren't feeling well mentally. Maybe you had a day where things were going wrong, one thing after the other, or there was a disappointment, or something happened to get you angry or upset. You may not be feeling well physically. Something might be going on financially, in a relationship, whatever may be the case. And for some reason, due to this or perhaps a combination of issues, you're more emotionally vulnerable on a given day. Oftentimes we don't think about all of this background stuff. We just see the mistake or the error that we made or the behavior that we did that's now bringing up shame or upsetting us. But we don't take the time to think about what got us there, tracing back the steps. In DBT, there's an excellent worksheet called Chain Analysis, and it can be used to trace your thoughts, to go back to see what exactly triggered the behavior. And oftentimes it's a complex set of different things. One thing led to another, and it all accumulated and built up. And this is often what happens when we do something that we regret or that we see as a failure. It has a lot of components. And looking at it this way can also help us increase our compassion for ourselves, which will help us to reduce the sabotaging from getting even worse. And so if you look at all of the things that led up to whatever the failure was, instead of just thinking, oh, I was going along just fine, and all of a sudden I just did XYZ and I'm a failure or I failed. It doesn't usually work that way. It's usually much more complex than that. It usually has to do with feeling very vulnerable due to a number of reasons and things going on in your life. So your compassion can increase when you realize, well, how human of me to have slipped and done XYZ with all of these things going on, and you list the things. But next time, when these things start to build up, here's what I can do differently so that I can avoid doing the types of behavior that I no longer want to engage in. So instead of beating yourself up, instead of, putting yourself down, looking at it as something that negates all of the positive things and all of the progress that you've made so far, because it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. Just because, let's say wherever you are in your recovery process, whether you're just acknowledging that you have issues and you're working on them, or you're far along in the recovery process, no matter where you're at, if you have a slip up, if you have a backsliding, if you have a setback, if you do something that you've been so successful at avoiding, it is not a failure. It is information to empower you. It's a slip up. Call a slip up, but it is information to empower you. And the way to get to that information is, as I suggested, to do the work of tracing back to what ultimately led you to be in a position where your guard was down enough to get back into old behavior. And then to start noticing the pattern, noticing what things trigger you, notice what things led to the slip up. And then the next time, again, when you're feeling stressed, under pressure, or a combination of the components that led to this particular slip up, you're going to be more on red alert. You're going to have a different awareness. You're going to say, this looks very familiar. I am not going down this path again. And it will hopefully make it a little bit easier the next time when temptation comes up or when things are starting to get overbearing and overwhelming, to choose your skillful behavior, your safe behavior, your loving and compassionate to self behavior over something that is self sabotaging or self harming in any way. So, again, if you have a setback, it's not a failure. It is information to empower you. You are human. We all have setbacks. Think of someone who is trying to quit smoking and unrelated to any mental health issues, goes along just fine, hasn't been smoking, let's say, for 2 to 3 weeks after, smoking for many, many years, has managed to go 2 to 3 weeks without having a cigarette. And then an unexpected bill comes in the mail for $2,500. And they just got into a fight with a loved one the day before. And work is cutting back on hours. They go out and have a cigarette because they feel so stressed and overwhelmed. Well, that's a setback, but it's not a complete failure. They've proven to themselves that they could go 2 to 3 weeks without a cigarette, and they became extremely stressed from every direction and all kinds of things and reverted back to an old, familiar, comforting behavior. Instead of beating themselves up and saying that they're horrible, they're never going to kick the habit and going out and buying another carton of cigarettes, just try again. Get rid of any cigarettes that are around and start over, knowing that you can very well do it, knowing that stress leads to that particular habit, and coming up with other ideas to cope the next time the stress gets to that point, removing easy access to cigarettes, those sorts of things. And you can take this example and apply it to your situation. Thank you so much for listening today. I have a lot of experience personally with coping with setbacks, and I hear about this particular issue with my students all the time. Their concern, they tend to feel, people who bring it up sometimes feel really badly. They feel shame. They feel all these things because I've been doing so well and then I messed up. Well, so what? That's part, I don't mean so what in the sense that I don't understand the gravity of how you feel and that I don't care about you. I mean, so what, in the sense that we take ourselves so darn seriously and think it's the end of the world, oftentimes when we just make a tiny mistake. We're not meant to be perfect. No one really expects us to be, except sometimes ourselves. And when I see people who are working hard on their recovery start to get down on themselves because they think a setback is a failure, I really want to encourage them and bring hope and remind them of all of the things that they've been doing to work so hard to get to where they are, and a number of human reasons, understandable reasons that we would very easily understand if someone else that we loved came and said, hey, this, I ended up, going to have this cigarette or going to do XYZ, and this is what's been going on. I've been under so much pressure and stress, and I slipped up. We'd have compassion and understand, most likely. And I try to instill that in other people and remind them of that, and I want to remind you of that as well. We can pick up the pieces and we can move on. And each time we do it, it gets a little bit easier. We get a little bit more resilient. Thank you so much for your time today. Hope this helped you in some way. Talk to you soon on the healingfrombpd.org blog, Facebook page, Twitter, Tumblr, Pinterest, Google+, and of course here on YouTube. Bye for now.